Ukraine declared independence in 1991 as the Soviet Union crumbled around it. For years after, the new Russian Federation struggled to find its footing. And for a brief moment, there was a hope that the Cold War could be put behind Russia and that it would find its way to better relations with the West. However, those hopes were dashed with President Vladimir Putin's election, a Cold War-era Soviet spy who retained a Cold War mentality. For Putin, the Soviet Union had fallen apart, but the dream of Soviet greatness had not died. And the West was the only thing standing in the way of this dream and the new Russian Federation. Keep watching to discover what exactly might happen to Ukraine with Russia's takeover. Putin saw Russia forever locked in a zero-sum game with the West, with only one winner. As the Soviet Union disintegrated, newly liberated Soviet republics and former client states rushed to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The Communist Party's power depended on keeping Stalinist ideology alive with the Soviet Union. Western liberal values and democracies pose a threat to this. This has never been truer than in the post-2000s, following Vladimir Putin's ascension to power. Liberal Western values are now viewed as a disease in Russia, threatening President Putin's absolute power over the Russian government. For Putin, Western culture is currently undermining Russia, and he has made significant efforts to wage a propaganda war both within and outside of his borders. The last thing Putin or his elites want is a free and democratic Russia. The only way they can prevent the country's falling political unrest is to create boogeymen from the West to unite Russians against. In the early 2010s, Ukraine began to seek closer economic and political ties with the West, stressing Putin. Initially, there was a desire to be more economically tied to the West to ensure Ukraine's prosperity. But as Russia increased pressure on Ukraine, a growing movement occurred within Ukraine to formally join NATO. Putin tried to stifle this desire through intimidation and propaganda within Ukraine, even infiltrating its government. The situation reached a tipping point in 2014 when President Viktor Yanukovych, a Putin stooge, refused to sign a free trade agreement with the European Union, which would have brought Ukraine further into the fold of the West, both economically and politically. Instead, despite the overwhelming desire of the Ukrainian parliament to sign this agreement, President Yanukovych chose to strengthen ties with Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union, which is led by the Russian Federations and comprised of former Soviet states. Protesters took to the streets immediately, and a full-fledged civil insurgency threw Kyiv into chaos. The Ukrainian people had broken free from Russian rule and had no desire to return to being a mere client state, resulting in violent clashes between protesters and police. The so-called Revolution of Dignity resulted in the occupations of government buildings throughout Ukraine and the removal of President Viktor Yanukovych from power. Yanukovych fled to Russia soon after, and Russia responded to the coup by seizing Crimea and supporting the breakaway provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk. Russia orchestrated pro-Russian protests in Sevastopol, and 4 days later, Russian troops without insignia stormed and seized Crimea's parliament. While other Russian troops took key strategic sites across the peninsula. After securing the peninsula, the Russian Federation installed pro-Russian Sergei Aksyonov in power. Shortly after, the referendum was held in which 97% of voters chose for Crimea to be absorbed by the Russian Federation. Unsurprisingly, no independent agencies ever verified these votes, and the United Nations voted overwhelmingly to declare the referendum illegal. Thus, Crimea is still considered to be part of Ukraine internationally. Still, with Vladimir Putin threatening to use nuclear weapons, no one sought to use military force to liberate the occupied peninsula. At the same time that Russian forces were seizing Crimea, Russia infamous Little Green Men, so named for their green insignia-free uniforms, moved into the separatist regions of Luhansk and Donetsk, cooperating with separatists and even fighting alongside them. Russia denied allegations that its military was stationed in separatist regions, but the ruse was eventually exposed as Russian armor joined the fight against Ukrainian forces. The so-called Donbas War would last until 2022, culminating in Russia's full-scale invasions of Ukraine. The real question, however, is what President Vladimir Putin intends to do with Ukraine once the war is over. The answer is contingent on how the war ends. The most unlikely outcome of this war is Russian forces completely occupying Ukraine. Initially, Putin claimed that he had no intentions of occupying any Ukrainian territory, and that his advance on Kyiv was merely intended to depose a pro-Western Nazi government. This may have been true in the early stages of the war. Putin may not have wanted to physically occupy Ukraine and instead settled for installing a puppet government. This would turn Ukraine into a client state similar to Belarus without the hassle of physically occupying it to quell an inevitable insurgency. It would also accomplish his grand goal of weakening NATO by denying it yet another member, particularly one located right on Russia's soft southern belly. However, as Russia's advance to Kyiv faltered and failed, Putin's strategy shifted dramatically, recognizing that he would be unable to take Kyiv and overthrow the government. Russian forces concentrated their efforts on breaking out of the separatist regions and seizing the vital Ukrainian southern coast along the Sea of Azov. With this coastline firmly under Russian control, Vladimir Putin now has a land corridor from Russia directly to Crimea. Crimea's water supply is no longer threatened by Ukrainian dams, as it was after the annexation, when Ukraine cut off Crimea's drinking water in retaliation for the invasion. However, this land corridor gives Russia complete control over the Sea of Azov, effectively turning it into a Russian lake. As a result, Putin's forces are now attempting to push north and west out of the land corridor, claiming as much of Ukraine as possible. Most importantly, a corridor to the west is extended all the way to Odessa and the Moldovan border. This would give Russia complete control over Ukraine's shipping ports, allowing it to economically isolate Ukraine and link up with its forces inside Moldova's breakaway region of Transnistria. Russia currently has 1,500 personnel stationed there. It is feared that connecting a land corridor across southern Ukraine will allow it to move more forces into the region and eventually take over all Moldova. This will give Russia control of half of the Black Sea and extend a security buffer away from Russia's vulnerable southern regions in the event of a NATO war. It is now clear that Putin intends to completely annex occupied territories within Ukraine, as the ruble was introduced as the official currency on May 1st in the occupied areas that remain relatively stable as in Russian hands. Street and building signs were also removed and replaced with Russian equivalents, and Russia guaranteed pension payments to Ukrainian retirees living in the territories. More importantly, Russian state televisions was brought to the occupied territories, allowing Russia to feed Russian propaganda to those living under occupation. Putin's goal is now territorial expansion, and his plans for Ukraine appear to be dependent on what happened next in the war. Russian forces appear incapable of truly capturing the entire of Ukraine, and the West, particularly the United States' commitment to arming Ukrainians makes it virtually impossible for Russia to do so. However, Russian forces may be able to seize the vital land corridor to Moldova and take Odessa, though even this is questionable given that Russia has yet to control Mariupol 3 months into the war fully. Further west, Kherson is a critical city to capture, and as of the writing of this video, Ukrainian forces are successfully counter-attacking Russian forces around the city. Moreover, as Europe commits to a gradual ban on Russian energy's imports, over the next years or so, Russia's economic situations will worsen, and its ability to continue this conflict will be jeopardized. As a result, Russia is likely to try to end the war by retaining territories it has gained, incorporating them into the Russian Federations and weakening Ukraine. Ukraine has been willing to compromise by establishing itself as a neutral nation, with neutrality enshrined in its constitution, and thus avoiding closer ties with the West. However, Ukraine wishes to have guarantor states sign this neutrality agreement, which would bind nations to come to Ukraine's aid in the event of another Russian invasion. What do you think will happen to Ukraine? Let us know in the comments down below. Make sure to like and share the videos if you enjoyed watching it. Then subscribe to never miss out on more interesting countdowns.